Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Blood, Dust and Snow, Chapter 26. January the 13th, 1943, Wednesday. The merry three from Taganrog, with full bellies, washed and shaved, are lying in comfy and clean beds in War Hospital 7 533 39661. We are in Makievka in the region of Stalino. In a few days we'll be transported to Dnepropetrovsk and from there, if we are lucky, into the Reich via the general government. The journey here was wild indeed. In Taganrog, a nurse and 9 officers got on board our train. We 3 wounded soldiers lying on the wagon floor couldn't help noticing that these gentlemen joining our transport for the wounded were of the finest behind-the-lines stock. Among them an official with tonsillitis and swollen lymphatic glands, another official with jaundice, and an Oberst of a Luftwaffe construction battalion suffering from the same ailment. Then the aforementioned Major Müller, branch of service, artillery, and suffering from diabetes and with a huge amount of luggage. Initially, he had hoped to be flown out, but due to the staggering amount of bags and suitcases he was traveling with, he was put on our train. And even here, all his stuff is filling nearly half a wagon. Simply said, these chaps with their silly ailments made me so sick that I could have puked there and then. No chance of that kind of treatment in a fighting unit. An official sent home with rheumatic problems? Is that a joke? How can a man like this be allowed to just drop his work and go home? When we disembarked at Makievka, the fine PK major and all his luggage were loaded onto a Luftwaffe ambulance van. When he climbed on board, Krakow and I drummed him out properly, using spoons and our empty mess tins while loudly whistling the Badenwiller March. January the 15th, 1943, Friday. Another morning in the hospital. We are washed, shaved, and Laura, a Russian girl, has made our beds and supplied us with some thickly cut jam sandwiches which we have already eaten. The doctor is reading a newspaper and Krakow is whistling some Schlager tunes, and when it's one of the more popular ones, the whole room joins him. Just now a guest who only arrived last night has said his farewell. A lieutenant of the army flak from Stalingrad who had a lot of interesting stories to tell. There are about 240,000 men trapped in Stalingrad. To that number, one has to add large numbers of Romanians and Croats who have been pushed into the city from the flanks. The Russians have attacked on November the 20th, and they had come from the north and south, and the Schwerpunkt of their attack at the Don near Kalach. Even before, the Russians had started to attack the German blocking positions from the north and with less force from the south, but all of those attacks had been repelled. The Russians only managed to hold on to the Volga itself and inside the steep-banked banyas in Stalingrad. Good Russian formations which defended themselves stubbornly. Particularly so in an industrial complex named Red October, where they fought so hard that our troops could not dislodge them. That bastion survived the relentless shelling, while the rest of the city around it sank into ashes. Never before had that comrade seen destruction of this scale. In this wasteland of rubble, the Russians had built command posts and posts in cellars and under the debris. There they now faced our troops, who were often not more than 10 or 20 meters away from them. This war about ruins and wasteland went on for weeks until on November the 20th the Russians attacked from the north towards Kalach and from the south towards Chinskaya. With that, the situation changed drastically. The Russians just smashed through the Romanian lines, and as I said before, that was not a difficult task. Kalach fell into Russian hands. The bridges hadn't been blown, the hospitals and supply depots hadn't been evacuated. Even the nurses and medical personnel fell into Russian hands. The Russians then charged on from their bridgeheads up to Oblyaskaya towards the west, and their armies then linked up in Chinskaya. The blocking positions along the Volga and Stalingrad had held firm, but now a new front, facing west, had to be established. There were enough men to do so, but it had required lots of organization. Some German troops had managed to break out of encirclement at the dawn from where, after blowing up all their heavy weapons and equipment, they had managed to escape into Stalingrad. Over 100 tanks had been left behind, and these would have been badly needed to avoid the catastrophe the German troops in the city were facing. But even tanks, self-propelled guns, artillery and heavy flak are of no use without fuel and ammunition. The German Western Front is now under heavy pressure. 2 officers who were only flown out of there yesterday told us so. The situation in the city is as follows. Parts of Stalingrad are firmly in Russian hands, including the Red October industrial complex, where they are supplied across the now frozen Volga. The northern blocking position then runs north past Gorodice towards the west-northwest, from 48.7 degrees alongside the Volga to 84.3 degrees. From there towards the south, the Western Front continues to the area of Petikovka, south of Stalingrad. The other blocking positions run along the line of Babuki-Nizhny Alexeyevsky, Charnovglevsky, Karpovka, Rokotino, Kravtsov and Sibenko. At Karpovka, a salient had been driven towards the west deep into Russian territory up to Marinovka. The distance from Karpovka to Stalingrad is about 30 kilometers, which is the same distance as between the northern and southern blocking position. A near-perfect square, yet large amounts of the interior of that square are held by the Russians. On January the 11th and 12th, the front lines in the northwest and southwest came under severe pressure again, but the salient was holding. It is expected, however, that the line there needs to be straightened out soon, and when that happens, the airfield will come under threat and into the range of the enemy artillery. An enormous blow for the defense of the fortress Stalingrad. To keep the garrison alive, the Luftwaffe needs to fly at least 300 tons of supplies into the city on a daily basis. A Ju-52 or a HE-111 can carry about 2 to 3 tons, but there are larger aircraft available there, FW-200 and multi-engine Junkers types. Yet, with each airfield falling into Russian hands, the supply problem is getting worse, and when the stage is reached at which our machines cannot land anymore and have to start dropping supplies from the air, well, then the wounded can't be evacuated anymore either. Usually, a soldier needs 500 to 600 grams of bread per day. In the fortress, they can be lucky when they get 100 grams, and often they get less than 50. That in turn means that they have started to slaughter the horses, and those would be neat as draft animals to make up for the lack of fuel. The lieutenant of the flak told us that there are still countless numbers of Russian civilians in the city. They live in the sewage systems and in underground shelters. During a crackdown by our troops in one of the latter, they found 250 tons of grain. The Russian civilians seem to live better lives than our Lancers. The few wounded Lancers which are being evacuated by air and then arrive here in the hospital look like walking corpses, so thin it is a miracle if they can still stand upright. No wonder, after having been in that cauldron for more than 2 months. Even though I have eaten like a thrashing machine since I have arrived here, the wounded men need as much food as they can get to build their strength up again. Together, we've just calculated how much ammunition the comrades in the cauldron will require per day. That alone requires a whole fleet of aircraft. Some comrades told us that in Stalingrad they could hardly ever use the available artillery as rounds needed to be conserved to repel Russian attacks. The lieutenant of the army flag, who had been in command of a 20mm battery, told us that the Russians had been so used to not being shelled that they had started drilling their troops only 2,000 meters away from the German lines and in full sight. He, however, would not have that, and one day had ordered his men to fire 3 magazines into the Russians. The success had been spectacular, but he received the rollicking of a lifetime from the section commander for wasting valuable ammunition. A lieutenant of the artillery confirmed that they had not been allowed to fire on even the most valuable targets. They could easily have targeted the Russian supply columns on the frozen Volga, but never received permission to fire. The air supply causes another problem, because the aircraft committed to it can't be employed in combat operations. In addition, the distance to Stalingrad is too great. Now they have transferred 35 Stukas to an airfield somewhere southwest of the city, and they are supposed to be well supplied with bombs and fuel. That is unlikely, however, as so far they haven't flown a single attack. The Russian, though, knows that our flag is out of ammunition and, as such, relentlessly bombs every sign of life on the ground. They even target individual men out on the streets. The Russian Air Force gives special attention to the airfield, disrupting our operations there. There is no sign of German fighter cover. Of the 240,000 men in the city, 70,000 are remnants of annihilated rear area and supply units like bakery and butcher columns, maintenance units, and so on. None of their personnel have ever seen any actual combat. These are organized into so-called fortress battalions and then thrown into battle across the city. I know from experience how useless such ragtag formations are. Most men now have winter clothing, but warm quarters are rare and there is a chronic lack of firewood. There are no places to warm oneself up. The only wood in Stalingrad comes from the house ruins and from several wood depots in the city. These, however, are under constant artillery and sniper fire, and it is forbidden to forage for wood during the daylight hours. Most of the little wood that is available has to be sent to the field kitchens. No food without wood. All this, the cold, no food, constant action, no sleep, no warmth, and the constant extortion lets the men fall over by the hundreds. After a few weeks of combat, even we looked haggard, tired and worn out, but we always had food and regular rations. The comrades in Stalingrad have nothing. The Russians there, however, have everything, mostly from German depots. Tins of plums, peaches, peas with bacon and rice with beef. How the times have changed. The comrades have told me that they had known about our attack on December the 12th from Kotelnikovo and that flak and tanks had been amassed in the southwest of Stalingrad, from where they had been supposed to fight their way towards us. They also told me about the great sadness that had befallen everyone when they had learned that we had been forced to withdraw. Now they all hope that another relief attack will be launched via Kalach. Well, that is all I learned about Stalingrad. Here in the hospital, there are new admissions on a daily basis, new comrades to talk to. Lieutenant Schmidt, whom I have come to like since I first met him at Taganrog, told me about the terrible mood in the encircled city. Some of his men had deserted to the Russians, where they had been given a bowl of food before being photographed. Then, after a further interrogation, they had been shot. At one point, a man of the 60th Infantry Division had deserted to the Russians, and they had then made him broadcast messages to his former comrades by loudspeaker, telling them how well he was being treated by the Russians. There are certain elements who prefer treason of this kind to the noble death of a soldier. In well-led units, however, such cases are the exception. An Unteroffizier of the 100th Jäger Division, a dashing and courageous young man, told us about the fighting in the Red October factory and about the distances over which Russians and Germans fought one another there. He's from the Steiermark and a lot of his comrades serve as snipers. He told us how they had picked off the Russian teams collecting water from puddles and shell holes. Never had he seen such an enormous amount of hand grenades being used in the fighting among the ruins. He also told us how he had set a house on fire using bottles filled with fuel, which he later ignited with hand grenades. It is highly interesting to listen to the comrades, and I have made an observation. The soldier of a second-line unit of the baggage train or something similar will tell a story in a completely different manner from an experienced fighting man, which is one of us, as I can proudly say. He will talk about the intensity of the artillery fire, the loud explosions, and he will use general terms to tell a story which will mainly be about himself. The frontline fighter will tell a story about how he pulled off this or that thing and what weapons he used and so on. He has no need to describe the battle and the sounds and sights. We have all experienced that ourselves. It is 1500 hours now and we have already switched the lights on. Russian Lora has just brought us something to drink. Krakow and the doctor are asleep since they finished eating at 14:30. Another hospital train has arrived and the new arrivals are being examined and bandaged at the moment. One of the nurses has just brought me some writing paper so I can start writing a few letters again. The nurses here are all from the Palatinate and the Saar. They don't quite correspond to my ideals. The women from northern Germany are a different breed, and the Russian women we see here, good lord, better not to waste a word about them. Lora surely is the most noble among them. They are all dressed in shabby clothing, and Lora also has slit eyes like a Mongol and an oddly short haircut. We couldn't help noticing, however, that the girl speaks excellent German and, in stark contrast to her weird look, is damned clever. We've got used to her, and only a short while ago she asked us, with a devious glint in her blue slanted eyes, if the Caucasus was still in German hands or if the Russians had repossessed it by now. Of course, we told her that it was still German, but she, and the other Russians too, heard a lot from our Lancers, and surely she has other additional sources of information. She asked me on what front I had served before I arrived here. She might look like a farmer's daughter, but she has studied medicine for 2 years and qualified as some kind of sub-surgeon. This is all a bit different from in Germany. In the Soviet Union, something like a private practice does not exist. Doctors of her qualification are being employed as company doctors for health control and in the villages as baby carers and so on. The doctors who study medicine properly and with a degree later work in hospitals. Here in the German hospital, this sub-surgeon is only allowed to do simple work, like serving food and making the beds, and if they do anything else, like the time when Lora changed one of Krakau's bandages, she has to do so under supervision of a German nurse. January the 16th, 1943, Saturday. Outside, some craftsmen are hammering like mad on the window frames. Quite a farewell concert, as today another train is supposed to leave, and we all hope that we'll be on board if it does. Yesterday evening, we three had ourselves carried downstairs into the cinema, where we watched a movie with Sarah Leander. That was quite a nice change, although the effort to get there was something else. After all that limping around and being carried up and down the stairs, we were all exhausted and slept like babies right until the morning. 1600 hours. No train for us today. So far, we have wasted nearly a week here and we have only traveled 150 kilometers. There was an ambulance train to Dnepropetrovsk, and if we had got on board, we would at least have been a little closer to the Heimat. And now we lie in our beds and are annoyed. It is a shame that I don't have any Russian language books with me, as I have noticed that I have forgotten quite a lot of words since the campaign in 1941. Today, there was a female Volksdeutsche here in the room. She is working as a translator. It is terrible to hear our beautiful language coming across the lips of these disgusting Russian proletarian types. Here in Russia, one learns to appreciate the advancement of the German workers in recent years. Krakow and the doctor are downstairs again and are watching another movie. I just had my plaster changed. I was surprised how much I must have bled in the last few days. I have to make an effort to keep my legs still until the wound is healed properly. I am very bored. January the 17th, 1943, Sunday. The barber has just turned up and is now standing at Lieutenant Krakau's bed. He greeted us by wiping his runny nose with the index finger and thumb of his right hand, then snorted the remains up and wiped the mess off on his mustache and the hair on his head. There followed a "good morning" with a much extended O and a long rolling R. And then he started giving Krakau a shave. Krakau, by the way, can't even grow one of those. The barber is an older Russian with a deeply furrowed face and a martial looks, ice-grey mustache under his nose. The hair on his head, however, is pitch black with only some white strands on the sides. He is of typical Slavic stock, like Podolsky, the Polish marshal. He is a big fellow with a heavy build and with bony yet dexterous fingers. The biggest difference to a German hairdresser, however, is that he keeps his mouth shut and doesn't try to force a conversation about the weather or politics on his customers. The nose incident aside, he is a very clean and cultured man. He is even wearing a white coat. The fellow is not your average barber. That the coat is, in the best case, infantry white and has a large brown stain on the right pocket, well, who cares about that? Ničevo niet, that doesn't matter. Below the coat, from which most of the buttons have been ripped and which is fastened around his belly with a muslin bandage, he is wearing the typical torn and tattered Russian gown. The buttons on the end of his sleeves are missing too, but that doesn't matter either. A couple more muslin bandages do the job just as well. That he is a long-standing employee of the German military is proven by the pair of thick grey army socks he is wearing on his feet, which in turn he has planted into rubber slippers. He isn't wearing any other shoes. Indeed, our barber is a clean man. Before he starts working on his customer's face, he washes his hands using water he has brought with him in an old rusty tin. Then he dries his big hands in a page of newspaper, which he completely shreds to bits during the drying process. Yes, he is a very clean man. With solemn movements, he then begins to soap up Krakau's face with an old brush which is missing half its bristles. We can be quite sure that the missing bristles were lost while soaping the faces of the Red Army soldiers who had been in Makievka before us. He is, one has to give him that, using hot water to shave Krakow. That is the old Russian school. From the dirty pocket of his once white coat, he pulls a bottle of spiritus, which he has stolen from the nurse, and then douses a big swab of cotton wool, which he has obtained in the same manner, with the sharp liquid which the nurses use to rub into our legs to improve the circulation. The alcohol-soaked cotton wool is placed on a thin tin plate and set alight with a match. Once that is burning, he holds a small aluminum tray above the flame, which he has filled with a tiny amount of water from his rusty tin. And even before the cotton swab has collapsed into itself, the water in the tray is beginning to steam. Hard to believe that in Germany barbers pay to have hot water boilers screwed into their walls. The Ruskies just carry them in their pockets. Very convenient and practical. The stupid Germans could just copy the Russian patent, which, with its open flame, also adds very much to the celebratory atmosphere. Now then, the dozen or so stubbles on Krakau's face have been thoroughly soaped up, and the barber pulls out a Russian officer's belt of the kind I took as a souvenir last year. He then affixes that to one of the bedposts, and voila, a sharpening stone for his brand new shaving knife has been created. The gleaming new knife fascinates me, and I can't help asking where he got that from. Surely this is not a Soviet product. And I am right, he tells me that he has bought this in the German Sattler store. And while he is talking to me, he starts sharpening the blade on this drop with the wide, sweeping, ritualistic movements of an Orthodox Russian priest. Well, it is Sunday after all. He then checks the sharpness of the blade with his thumb and considers it sufficient to mow Krakau's stubble. But he is not ready to proceed with the shaving. No, first he wets another cotton swab with liquid from one of the 5 little bottles which he arranged with military precision on Krakau's bedside table, and then wipes the blade with it. And then, very solemnly, the blade is set to work on Krakau's face. The lieutenant has closed his eyes and has leaned back in expectation of the great event, and has tied his towel like a bib around his neck. The doctor remarks that the bib makes him look even younger and that he actually looks quite cute with it. Now the shaving has begun, and the old barber is gathering momentum for each cut and swipe of the blade by turning his entire body. Looking at him from the back, bent down over Krakow like that, one could think that he is a Muslim, repeatedly bowing down in prayer. After each stroke, he wipes off the excess soap in the palm of his left hand, as if prayer has suddenly become a rarity, and soon the work is done. No, I was wrong, it is not done. With his fingers, with which in the meantime he has wiped his nose several times more, he now runs over Krakau's skin to find the spots where some more thin stubble might be hiding. A few more swipes of his German blade, and Krakau's face is as soft as a baby's bottom. And now the next act of the great ceremony is going ahead. The washing of the face and the application of the lotion. With another swab of cotton wool, which he wets in his rusty tin before pouring on some alcohol, he now rubs down the sideburns, the lips and the neck of his patient. Then the contents of a small red tin box are used to smear the master's hand with some gelatinous substance, probably to make them more slippery, and then he rubs the contents of another small bottle slowly and very ceremoniously into Krakau's face. The whole grand procedure reminds me of the anointing during the administration of the last rites. And then the sacred ceremony comes to an end. The bottles disappear into the coat pockets. He takes the little trays and bowls and bows down deeply when Krakow pays him with a few cigarettes. "Goodbye," the barber says, and then raises his hand, which still holds the cigarettes, slightly above his head in a gesture which resembles a mixture of a German salute and a papal blessing. Then the door closes, and the high priest of the barber's profession has left our dormitory. Our comrade, who is known among the nurses, themselves only just old enough to vote, as the little boy, is raising the baby-bottom soft skin of his face into the sunlight and looks mightily pleased with himself. And while the smell of perfume is slowly drifting away, we turn back to our usual pastimes. The doctor is reading, and I am writing. January the 18th, 1943. Monday. On this day, 1 year ago, a Junkers flew me from Smolensk to Königsberg. A year ago today, the war in the East had, for a little while, come to an end for me. Today, from my warm room, I am again looking at the war from a distance. I and my 2 brothers in suffering are still stuck here. There is much traffic on the hallways and corridors outside, because today another 50 comrades are being released. Only the bedridden cases like us have to remain here. Now we have started crying havoc, demanding to be at least taken to Stalino and from there, together with the sitting cases, to Dnipropetrovsk. It was to no avail. The doctors here don't care about anything. They just want to be left in peace. Slowly but surely, I am fed up with being wounded. The gratitude of the fatherland is not very uplifting at all. Last night, a Hauptmann serving on some corps staff arrived to spend the night here. He told us some amusing stories about the Romanians. He himself had a streak of bad luck recently. His staff headquarters had to run away from the Russians no fewer than 6 times, and during the last time they managed to capture a staff motor coach full of top-secret documents and the best uniforms of the general in command of the corps. January the 19th, Tuesday. Yes, still in Makievka. We have been here for so long that we have even been informed of the hospital gossip. This whole place is really getting on my nerves now. Yesterday, Laura told us what an absolute mess this place is. Later, Agnes, the little nurse, came in to cry on our shoulders, followed by Marie, who told us a free additional thing. I am well informed now. The next time I get to the front, I will be doubly afraid of catching a bullet, as this will result in yet another odyssey through war hospitals like this, where nothing is working as it should. Unbelievable for anyone who hasn't experienced it himself. When Laura left and closed the door behind her, she summarized it all by saying, "This is not a hospital." It is very obvious that the Russians are soaking up all information of this kind and similar deficiencies of our medical services, and that includes Laura. We have to take far greater care to make sure everything is running smoothly and have to be far more suspicious about the Russians who work for us. The things which are happening here would be severely punished in a fighting unit. Here, however, they only result in a few days of arrest. But anyway, I don't want to warm up the gossip again. Yesterday, after Hauptmann Hohleben had made off to Stalino, a lieutenant was brought to our room suffering from severe frostbite on both hands. He is an infantryman, just like Lieutenant Krakow, and originates from Pomerania, not far away from Krakow's Heimat. Now we have 2 bachelors in the room and a banter equilibrium has been established. January the 22nd, 1943. Friday. For the foreseeable future, we'll have to stay at Makievka as there is no transport available for us. It seems the troops are being concentrated somewhere in the area and that all the transport available is being deployed for that purpose. The new Unteroffizier in charge of our ward has informed us about it, followed by the measly assistant sergeant who told us the same. This month we are not getting back to the Reich. Question is if we will ever get back at all or any further than Kiev. But what can I say? After a long night's sleep, the world doesn't look as bad anymore. I can't change it. I just wait until I can at least limp around without assistance. 15:30 hours. Until a moment ago, one could read without the electrical light, and after shouting for about 10 minutes, Nurse Gretel comes in to switch it on for me. I am alone in our room. Flamme, our new man, the doctor and Krakow are downstairs watching a movie. Flamme has given me a book to read, and I am trying to kill time with it. It's wasted, either way. January the 23rd, 1943. Saturday. Today we were informed that it is most likely that we'll be taken away from here in an express leave train. We are sitting fully dressed on our beds, waiting for what is going to happen. Seems that the having to stay here story was nothing but a latrine rumor. It seems we have received our rations and are now waiting to see if Lieutenant Krakow, infantryman, unmarried, unblemished and unshaven, will be kissed goodbye by Nurse Mark. Margarete has shown a lot of interest in our little boy, much to our amusement, I have to say. But later, Nurse Laura told us that Mark has already given her heart to a tankist downstairs, but who knows, she might still appear. At the moment, it is a little chaotic here. All our packed bags and suitcases are littering the floor. My stuff is standing next to my bed, including my sword, the Cossack saber, the old fur hat from Pachlebin, and the gloves from Zalewski. Both will be very useful on our journey ahead. Katja, the red nurse, has packed my toes into plenty of cotton wool. Again, I am a little afraid about the journey. The cold is really worrying me. But I have survived worse than that. The hospital here is a shithole, and I am glad to get away. Another highly interesting episode, and many things resonate with me. For one, I found it extremely hilarious how he and the infantry lieutenant absolutely despise the Remfs that are traveling along with them. They even get to troll a major who is leaving them at some point by very badly performing a march for him with cutlery. Even though the major severely outranks them, I'm sure he knew better than to seek conflict with frontline troops. This disdain hasn't changed a bit today. I'm sure those of you who have served as well will confirm this. We also learn about the huge logistical nightmare that was the Battle of Stalingrad. What he tells us about the amount, or lack thereof, of bread that is needed and the amount of bread that is actually available. Imagine fighting in the winter against the Russians in a huge city and surviving on less than 1,000 calories per day. Absolutely insane and morale-breaking. Another thing are these stories about German soldiers deserting in the hopes of somewhat fair treatment, only to be shot immediately after a short interrogation. Don't surrender to the Russians or try to desert, it generally won't end well. And finally, the saga of the Russian barber. Again, next to the epic description of the obviously very clean and sanitary man, on the sideline he comments about how the Russian barber doesn't expect him to talk, and that he is quite thankful for this. This is exactly the same as today. I personally despise talking during a barber visit just like him. So, how is it where you live? Tell me down below if you prefer to chat or if you prefer the silence when having your hair cut. See you next episode. Cheers.